Hey guys, we are going to be continuing on our ecosystems lesson. And so we did the Lorax and we talked about how we saw the ecosystem change and how that had a chain reaction and everything. So now we're going to be moving on to aquatic ecosystems versus terrestrial ecosystems. When you hear the word aquatic, you can probably assume that aquatic ecosystems consist of ecosystems that have to do with water, which is what I wrote up here. I said that when you have an aquatic ecosystem, you can have a freshwater or you can have a marine. So when you hear an aquatic ecosystem that's freshwater, that's going to be your ponds, your streams, your wetlands. And then when you are talking about marine ecosystems, you're talking about your oceans and your coral reefs. So we have freshwater and marine. You can also think of saltwater, because that's going to affect the different plants that live there and the different types of fish. You guys are going to do a different assignment on aquatic ecosystems so you guys can understand that better. Then when you're talking about terrestrial ecosystems, you're going to be thinking about your grasslands, your forests, your deserts, and your tundra. Those are going to be the main ones you guys hear about. You guys might be hearing about different ones, but you guys are probably just going to be sticking to those. So what we're going to be learning about is different types of limiting factors that make up each of these ecosystems. And the assignment I'm going to post, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to read it to you, and I'm going to go into further detail and explain the questions that I expect you guys to answer from these. If you guys open the assignment, I'm going to go ahead and read the beginning part of it. It says, ecosystems include all of the biotic and abiotic components of a community. I want to stop you right there and explain that biotic and abiotic, you guys heard the terms non-living and living things in the first ecosystems video you guys watch. You guys need to make sure that you guys know that biotic means living and abiotic means non-living. When you hear that prefix bi or biotic, bi or bio, that means living. When you hear about biology, that's life, that's living things. It's a study of living things. So biotic means living, abiotic, not living. So a variety of ecosystems cover the earth and can be broken into two different types, aquatic and terrestrial. Although ecosystems contain a variety of species that interact with each other in their environments, different types of ecosystems usually have different limiting factors that lead to adaptations in the organisms that live there. For example, the only plant life in the grasslands ecosystem is grasses and small shrubs because there is not enough rainfall to sustain the growth of trees. A limiting factor for the grasslands ecosystem is then water. So it's basically saying that this is talking about water, which is abiotic. Water is not living. So an abiotic factor of the grasslands is water, because the amount of water in that ecosystem affects the different plants that live there. So you're not going to see, if you look in your backyards, you're not going to see the same types of, you're not going to see pine trees and oak trees and these luscious bushes in the grasslands. You're not going to find the same plants as you would in the rainforest versus the grasslands because the water is different. It is limiting the type of life that is there. It is limiting the different things that you find in the ecosystem. So you guys are going to go ahead and read the information about aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems and then compare and contrast them by answering the questions that you guys have below. So you guys are I'm going to go ahead and read them. So in terrestrial ecosystems, water is not always readily available. This means that organisms often have adaptations to allow them to conserve water. Plants, for example, often close their stomata, which is the pores in the leaves, during the day in order to minimize transpiration. The terrestrial environment can experience large fluctuations in the temperature. In some desert ecosystems, daytime temperatures can reach 100 degrees while falling below 50 degrees at night. The organisms that live in the ecosystem need to have adaptations for both hot and cold temperatures. Another important aspect of living on land is the effect of gravity, which you guys learned about. Because gravity constantly pulls organisms downwards, they must have a support system. For many animals, this takes a form of a skeleton. Plants have strong cell walls that offer support and allow them to grow upwards against the pull of gravity. So it mentioned several different types of factors in there. We talked about how the plants, they close their pores so they can hold water for a longer period of time. And it talked about how the skeleton, that we have skeletons and animals have skeletons, and plants have big cell walls so it can hold them down against, hold them up against the pull of the gravity that's going to want to push them down. They have to have something to support them on land. And then aquatic ecosystems. Water is everywhere. Many organisms have adaptations to allow excess water to be pumped out of the bodies. Organisms must also adapt to the salinity level in the water. Because only 70% of sunlight penetrates the water surface, light is an important resource. Most producers must live at the surface of the water in order to maximize their light intake. Organisms that live in the deep water have adaptations to living without light. Water is much more supportive than air. Water is much more supportive than air on land. While some aquatic organisms have skeletons, many do not. They are able to float in the water. Some areas of the ocean have very low oxygen content. In these areas, organisms have special adaptations to maximize oxygen in the water. So we're going to go and talk about the limiting factors that lead to the adaptations in the organisms in the aquatic ecosystems. It talked about the salinity level of the water. Animals have to adjust to that. That's a limiting factor. The salinity level in different aquatic ecosystems is going to affect the types of animals that live there. And the animals that do live in those parts, those ecosystems, they have those adaptations so they are able to live there. And some animals have to have, they adapted to the oxygen levels. If fish are not used to one oxygen level, they're not going to thrive. They're gonna die if they're in an oxygen level that they are not used to. So that is a limiting factor. Those factors are limiting the types of animals that can live there. If we go into the first question, it says, list 3 abiotic factors for terrestrial ecosystems. I wrote right up here, abiotic, which again also means non-living factors for terrestrial. So that's going to be the first paragraph we read. So we need to think of it. It asks you to list 3, but I'm going to go ahead and list 1 for you to get you guys started. So one abiotic factor is I'm going to write temperature. Because the temperature is going to affect the different animals that live there. And the animals that do live there, and that ones that thrive, have special adaptations to the temperature. Depending on the ecosystems, they have adaptations to fit with the temperature that goes on there. Abiotic factors for aquatic. I talked about the salinity level in the water, so I'm going to go ahead and write that down. Salinity is not a living factor. It's either temperature. Temperature is not living, salinity level is not living, so that would be an abiotic factor for each one. Then after you list the 3 abiotic factors, you're going to go ahead and list what is a limiting factor for each of the ecosystems, which we went ahead and talked about. So I want you guys to go ahead and write down what we talked about for what is a limiting factor for each one. Then you guys go to question 4. It's going to have a letter, a fill in the blank, a sentence, and then a couple lines underneath that. So it says, listed below are partial descriptions of each new species. Determine if each was discovered in a terrestrial or aquatic ecosystem. Below each description, explain your reasoning. So I'm going to go ahead and do A with you guys, and then you guys are going to do B, C, and D by yourselves. So it says blank, a short plant that is covered in tiny hairs that insulates against extreme cold and heat. So you guys are going to have to go back to the terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems paragraphs, and you're going to have to determine whether it's that description is talking about a factor that would be in terrestrial or aquatic. In A, it's talking about that this plant has tiny hairs that insulate against extreme cold and heat. And when you go back to the terrestrial paragraph, it talks about that it says terrestrial environment can experience large fluctuations in temperature, which daytime can reach nearly 100 degrees or fall below 50 degrees at night. So this extreme change in temperature means that A is going to be talking about a terrestrial species. So the blank next to A is going to be terrestrial. And then I'm going to have to explain my reasoning. So the reason I chose terrestrial for A is because the tiny hairs help the large, make sure I want to spell this right, fluctuations and then so you guys are going to do that for B, C, and D. Alright, so if you guys have any questions, please feel free to email me, where I'm sure Miss S would even answer some questions if I'm not available at the moment that you guys need them. Hopefully we can discuss this more on live if we get the chance to, and I will also post an additional assignment about different types of aquatic ecosystems. And then there's like 2 short videos, and there's some reading to go along with it, and then some quiz questions at the end that you can go ahead and answer. So hope you guys enjoyed this.